Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're venturing into some pretty fascinating territory, the intersection of Bitcoin and Buddhist philosophy.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah, we'll be unpacking some seriously thought-provoking ideas from technologist and Tibetan Buddhist Scott Sniva about how these seemingly different worlds, kind of collide.
Looking forward to it.
I'll admit, when I first heard this concept, I pictured myself like meditating with my crypto wallet, which,
Hmm.
to be honest, isn't that far off from some mornings. But once you get past the initial, wait, what? There's some seriously thought-provoking stuff here. So to help us make sense of it all, we have our expert in, well, everything, it seems.
It's the joy of learning. And this deep dive is particularly intriguing. You see, we often view Bitcoin through a purely technological or financial lens. But bringing in a philosophical framework like Buddhism adds a whole new dimension to our understanding.
Yeah, it's like using a completely different set of glasses to look at the same thing, and suddenly you notice details you hadn't before.
Precisely.
Like, for example, this idea of Bitcoin being decentralized really resonated with me. Um, it's like this core principle in Buddhism, interdependence, but applied to money, right?
Exactly. And it challenges a foundational concept of how we usually think about money and control. We're accustomed to central banks and governments, calling the shots, but Bitcoin operates without that central authority. It's a network, a collective, reflecting the Buddhist idea that we're all part of a larger system.
Okay, so walk me through this. What happens when you remove that central authority? How does that really impact things?
Imagine a spider web. Each thread, while seemingly insignificant on its own, is crucial to the entire structure. Removing one thread weakens the web, and removing enough can destroy it.
Makes sense.
Similarly, in a decentralized system like Bitcoin, every participant contributes to the whole. It shifts the focus from individual ownership to collective responsibility, much like the Buddhist concept of interconnectedness.
Instead of a few powerful players controlling everything, it's more like this constant give and take.
Precisely. This interconnectedness promotes balance and, in a way, fosters a sense of shared responsibility for the system's health and sustainability.
That's a pretty radical shift in perspective. And speaking of shifts, this ties into another fascinating parallel, this concept of freedom. And no, I'm not just talking about, like, buying that island with your Bitcoin fortune.
Right.
Although I'm sure that kind of freedom is nice too.
Of course.
But, it's
Buddhism actually emphasizes freedom from something from those negative emotions like greed, anger, and ignorance that can, keep us feeling trapped.
Oh, I know that feeling. Remember that time I told you about finally paying off my credit card debt?
Right.
I danced around my apartment for an hour. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about finally feeling in control, like a weight had been lifted.
Exactly. That feeling of financial control can be incredibly liberating. But Buddhism takes it a step further. It suggests that true freedom, lasting freedom, comes from mastering our own minds, our reactions to the world around us.
So while Bitcoin might offer a degree of like financial freedom, we
Yeah.
still need to put in the work to cultivate that, that inner freedom Buddhism emphasizes.
Precisely. It's like having the most high-tech aerodynamic bicycle in the world. It can offer you incredible speed and efficiency,
Right.
but you still need to learn how to ride it,
Yeah.
how to navigate the terrain to
Hmm.
truly experience that freedom.
I like that analogy. And speaking of navigating terrain, let's talk about the ethical landscape of all this. Can money really be mindful? It seems like such a contradiction.
It might seem that way, but this is where the conversation gets really interesting. Buddhism places a huge emphasis on ethical conduct.
Sure.
Things like nonviolence, compassion, and mindful action.
Right.
And surprisingly, these values can absolutely be applied to how we think about and use money.
Okay, I'm hooked. Give me an example. How does, say, nonviolence translate to the world of Bitcoin?
Well, consider how Bitcoin operates. It's transparent.
Okay.
Every single transaction is recorded on the blockchain. Think of it like a public ledger that anyone can view. This inherent transparency becomes a powerful tool against corruption, fraud, and those shady financial dealings that can cause real harm to individuals and even entire economies.
So more transparency equals less opportunity for, let's say, another Bernie Madoff situation.
Exactly. Now, it's not a perfect system, right?
Great.
Bad actors will always try to find workarounds. But the potential is there for a more ethical financial system, one that aligns with those Buddhist values of honesty, fairness, and yes, even nonviolence, by reducing the potential for harm.
That's wild. It's like the very structure of the system encourages more ethical behavior. But how about compassion? Where does that fit into this whole Bitcoin Buddhism connection?
That's a great question. Because Bitcoin gives individuals more control over their finances, it can empower them to support causes they believe in and participate in systems of mutual aid in ways they couldn't before. We see examples of this with charitable donations being made in Bitcoin and the rise of decentralized finance platforms, enabling microloans in developing countries.
So it's not just about making a profit, it's about aligning your money with your values. I like that.
It's about recognizing that money, in itself, is simply a tool. It's how we use it, the intention behind it that ultimately matters.
Yeah.
And by bringing those Buddhist principles of compassion and mindful action into the equation, we can start to shift our relationship with money from one of pure self-interest to one that considers the well-being of others and the planet as a whole.
It's like we're using money as a tool for positive change, not just personal gain.
Precisely. And that brings us to another intriguing aspect of Bitcoin. Its potential to transcend borders.
You mean this whole space money concept? I have to admit that part always throws me for a loop.
It might sound like science fiction,
Yeah.
but think about it. Bitcoin isn't limited by the same constraints as traditional currencies. It doesn't rely on physical borders, governments, or even planets
Yeah.
necessarily.
So as we explore beyond Earth, Bitcoin could be like a universal form of exchange.
It's a possibility. As we venture further into space, we might need a system of value that can function across those vast distances. Bitcoin, at least theoretically, could fit the bill.
That's mind-blowing. Instead of exchanging dollars for galactic credits or whatever, we're all using Bitcoin to buy our space snacks.
It's a fascinating thought experiment, isn't it? It challenges us to think beyond our current limitations, to imagine a future where value and exchange operate on a truly global, even interplanetary scale.
Okay, my mind is officially in orbit now, but before we get too lost in space, let's bring things back down to Earth for a moment. Why does all this matter to, the person listening right now? What's the takeaway?
That's the key question. Understanding these concepts isn't just about Bitcoin or Buddhism in isolation. It's about recognizing the potential for new systems, new ways of thinking about value, finance, and even our relationship to the world around us.
So it's less about converting all our savings to Bitcoin and more about opening our minds to different possibilities.
Exactly. It's about asking questions, challenging assumptions. For example, what if we approached our own financial decisions with a bit more mindfulness, a bit more awareness of the impact of our choices?
Right, like are we letting those negative emotions we talked about earlier, greed, envy, the fear of missing out, drive our spending habits? Or are we making conscious choices that align with our values?
Precisely. And it goes beyond personal finance. Understanding these concepts, the intersection of technology, philosophy, and ethics, it empowers us to engage with the world in a more informed, thoughtful way.
So this deep dive wasn't just about Bitcoin and Buddhism. It was about sparking a new way of thinking about the systems we're a part of and how we can use those systems to create a more mindful and compassionate world.
Beautifully put. It's about recognizing our interconnectedness and realizing that even seemingly small actions can have a ripple effect.
Now, those are some parting words to ponder. A huge thank you to our expert for guiding us through this incredible exploration. It's clear that the intersection of Bitcoin and Buddhist philosophy is rich with insight and possibility.
It was my pleasure.
And to our listeners, keep those brains buzzing, and we'll catch you on our next deep dive into the unexpected corners of knowledge.